In early April 1941, the Communications Battalion of the 134th Infantry Division, in which I served, left Mariupol for a camp in the vicinity of Belgorod, a wonderful place for military training. Among the century-old pine trees, we equipped an obstacle course, a smoking room, a canteen, classrooms for training, tables for cleaning weapons, set up tents. But a few days passed, and we were ordered to destroy everything that was built, so that the enemy could not guess what was in this place. Then the regiment was built up, and a long-distance march was announced. Where we were going, we were not told, but we did not expect an explanation. To the long distance, so to the long distance. Anyway, soon demobilization. The bosses know best. We were ordered to take on ourselves everything that is necessary for a soldier on a hike. Weapons, ammunition, gas mask, flask, duffel bag with an inviolable food supply, overcoat in a roll. The heaviness for a hike, but our superiors, accustomed to fulfill and overfulfill, ordered to take on themselves also blankets in a roll. It was already above all norm, heavy, uncomfortable, and unnecessary, but an order is an order. On top of all this, the radio operators carried a radio station. Today, when with the help of a phone, which fits in the breast pocket of the jacket, you can contact almost anywhere in the world, the reader will probably be interested to know that the Radio 6P kept a stable connection for only 6 kilometers with a microphone and 12 kilometers with a Morse key, and its total weight was just under 4 poods. It was carried in 2 packages. Each of them had to be carried by a team of 4 men, changing each other during the march. At first, despite the heavy burden, we moved quite briskly. We were young and had enough strength. We left early in the morning, even before dawn. It was pleasant to feel the morning coolness, to watch the sun rise, how objects gradually acquire volume and bright colors. It was joyful to watch the clouds floating in the sky, to look at the lush greenery, at the white Ukrainian huts. Gradually the road dried up from the morning dew. The dust rose, the sweaty faces of the soldiers became grey. It became difficult to breathe. The straps of the radio station crashed into the body. Now we did not care about the beauties of nature. Halt was pounding in our heads. Halt! I wish we could break. But finally, the command halt. You can take off your ammunition, fall on the ground and rest. But first we have to put the rifles in the pyramids. We put the rifles bayonet to bayonet, get rid of ammunition and fall to the ground. But Senior Lieutenant Strelikov appears and tells us to tighten the twine. He checks whether the pyramids are placed evenly. It turns out unevenly. Stand up. Correct the pyramids. We get up, correct the pyramids and fall to the ground again. But the senior lieutenant doesn't care. Get up. Fix the ammunition. Cursing the meticulous Strelikov in our thoughts. We get up and fix the ammunition. Now everything is as it should be, and the superiors passing by on horseback will be satisfied with the efforts of the senior lieutenant. And we, having finally got a chance to rest, fall into a heavy sleep. Again the command rise, sounds, and everything repeats again. Only now from the first steps you feel how painfully the straps of the walkie-talkies cut into your shoulders, and you think only about the rest stop. So days and weeks passed, and we were still walking, pining from heat and fatigue. We were not allowed into the towns for the sake of secrecy. We bypassed them on country roads, through villages, village women seeing us off with anxious looks. Where are they sending you boys? Are you going to war? The political instructors laughed tiredly. What war? With whom? When they see soldiers, it's war. When we went out into the steppe, we saw that other divisions were moving westward on parallel roads. But even this did not cause us gloomy forebodings. Weeks passed, and we were still marching. From fatigue, we were unable to think of anything else but rest, and we were being rushed. Step up, tighten up, don't fulfill the movement schedule. So from the Black Sea, bypassing the cities, we reached Poltava. Before the city, we stopped in a field. My friend Stepa Karnok, a stout man, a merrymaker, and a company singer, was perplexed. What are we waiting for? A Poltavian. He hoped to run to his parents. He went to his superiors, begged them to let him go. He promised to keep up. They wouldn't let him go. Why? I was surprised. After all, we are still standing. Major Yatsenko say, "In 2 weeks you'll be demobilized, then you'll see your parents." Stipa replied without enthusiasm. Yatsenko was not a bad man. He could not know that we were going to war, and that many of us and he himself would soon be dead. Toward evening the rain began to drizzle. Increasing in intensity, it turned into a downpour. We were all soaked to the skin. When night fell, we were ordered to pass through the city, but in such a way as to maintain secrecy. The city slept in darkness. We walked along its outskirts. The sparse streetlights illuminated only the slanting streams of the downpour. The dark silhouettes of houses loomed orphanously on the right. Stepa Karnak, gazing into the darkness. My house is there. I didn't know which house he was talking about, so I kept silent and continued walking. I heard only the sound of water pouring from the sky and the squelching of hundreds of boots on the wet cobblestones. Stipa kept turning around and staring into the darkness. He saw his house for the last time in his life. They went out of town. The dim lanterns disappeared from sight. The cobblestone underfoot changed to a country road. The rain and 1,000 feet had turned it into thick, viscous mud, heavy clods sticking to the soldiers' boots. Every step was difficult, and the downpour did not stop. We should call a halt, but we could not lie down in the mud. Many soldiers slept on the move. I also fell asleep and woke up only when I bumped into those ahead of me. It dawned, and we were still dragging along, wet, tired, with clods of mud stuck on our boots. Mesifejan troubles. One answer, said Major Yatsenko, and announced a halt. Having left the road, we fell on the wet grass and immediately fell asleep. When we woke up, the sun was already high. We wrung out our still wet clothes, cleaned our boots from mud, ATT, and went hiking again. Keep up. Pull up, guys. We're behind schedule. Behind the column, several submarines were carrying soldiers who could not endure the campaign, and I and my comrades were still holding on. So we went from the Black Sea through the whole Ukraine, and it seemed that there would be no end to this campaign. We passed Zolotonosha. From it we went along the forest roads. From time to time the roads led us to villages, and then again forests. At one of the stops we read the TASS message. The Western press is spreading false rumors about Soviet troops moving to the border. This does not correspond to reality. We are holding a planned railroad exercise, and we, who walked on foot through the whole Ukraine to the Polish border, believed in the railroad exercises and did not believe the bourgeois press. We spent the night in the forest. In the morning I was awakened by the officers of the headquarters. No. Can you catch Moscow at your station? I'll try. I threw an antenna on a tree and, turning on the receiver, caught the broadcasting station Comintern. Mysing Dekem Lars bombed Kiev and Minsk. I heard and gave the headphones to the officer who was impatiently reaching for them. The officer listened to the bulletin to the end and said, "Yes, brothers, war." Soon the whole camp knew that the Germans had attacked us. Today, looking at movies about the beginning of the war, I see. They learn about the German attack and immediately bitter tears. It was not like that in life. Both on the civilian and in the army, no gloom. Everybody was in high spirits. Everybody was excited. Everybody wanted to punish the Germans for their treachery. Everybody was sure that in 2 weeks there would be nothing left of the Germans. That day we did not go anywhere, obviously. We were waiting for an order from above. At noon our calculation was summoned to the division headquarters, showed on the map a small clearing and told to deploy a Vons post on it. On the map there was a road leading to the clearing. Having found this road on the ground, we soon reached the clearing and, moving away from the road to an open place, deployed the radio. There were 3 of us. Grisha, Samko, Mukhambejambek, Shinov and me. Stipa Karnak was left on the regimental radio for more reliable communication with us. Having agreed on the time of duty, The three of us lay on the grass and looked up at the sky. White clouds were floating in the sky. The sun was shining. I could not believe that somewhere fires were burning, shells were bursting, and people were dying. The road was deserted. Only in the evening a lone brigade appeared on it. Having stopped the horse, the coachman, a young boy with a luxuriant whitish bush, came toward us. "Mo," they asked, approaching us, "is it true that there is a war?" "It is true." "And what are you listening to?" "It's a military secret, but I won't hide it from you." Mook switched to a mysterious whisper. "As soon as we see Germans, we'll inform HQ." The boy stood for a while and, turning around, went to his cart. But war has its advantages," Muck continued, joking. "At least you can get a good night's." He collapsed on the grass, blissfully closing his eyes. The first night of the war passed peacefully. I was on duty on the radio. In the morning, when it was already beginning to get grey, I handed over the duty to Grisha Samko, and I lay down on the grass, didn't sleep. "Grigory, look," said Samko. I opened my eyes. There were black clouds in the sky, and only the edge of the sky began to pinken. "Look at the road," Muck specified. He was awake too. A familiar boy and a woman were running towards us from the road. "Meptitis have jumped on our forest. Report to the proper place," said the woman, out of breath. "No. How many?" "The watchman said 5 or 6, answered the boy. "They have already beaten the fox." "Beat him?" "The watchman and the policeman. The watchman has a double-barreled shotgun. The policeman has a nagant." The woman added to the boy in a hurry. Grisha Samko had already called the division headquarters. Bekshinoff and I grabbed our rifles and ran together with the boy and the woman to the brigade, got into it, and went to catch the saboteurs. Frankly speaking, I do not know what worried me more: the landing of saboteurs or the vain opportunity to catch spies. Before the war, every third hero of our movies apprehended a spy. Even in such extraordinary films as Partbillet, Komsomolsk, Bright Path, Girl with Character, heroes and heroines successfully caught spies. Now we had the opportunity to catch real spies. It was a great luck. We drove through a large village and stopped at the edge of the forest. Immediately we were surrounded by a crowd of collective farmers, and everyone, interrupting each other, began to say that they had heard shots in the forest. Without wasting time, Bekshinoff and I ran into the forest. At first we ran side by side until we got tired. When we found no one, we stopped to catch our breath. Then we decided to move 100 or 200 paces away from each other and thus comb the forest, and if anything, call each other for help. We wandered through the forest for a long time, but neither saboteurs nor even traces of gunfire were found. It was quiet and creepy. Behind every bush could lurk an enemy. The hunting fervor in US diminished. I became bored, and I began to think about returning to the camp. Suddenly, a few steps away from me, behind a tree trunk, I saw a man. From surprise, I flinched and threw forward the bayonet of my rifle. "Rize. Who is he?" Instead of answering, the man put his finger to his lips and looked back gingerly into the forest. He was unshaven, our clothes, kolkhoz clothes, blood on his right leg. Watchman, I thought, and, ashamed of my fright, I lowered my rifle and approached the wounded man. "I said, I am from there, from Kolgospu," he said in whispered Ukrainian, and pointing to his bloody leg, added, "I can't make it home." I bent down to see what was wrong with his leg. A hard blow to my head knocked me off my feet, and he got on top of me and started choking me. He was a strong boy, and I struggled desperately. I pulled my hands off his throat, punched him in the face, tried to scream, but for some reason I was getting weak. But he had an iron grip on my throat. I couldn't tear his hands away. I was gasping for breath, my eyes went dark, then suddenly a gunshot, that's it, flashed through my brain. He shot me. But no, his arms weakened, and he fell on his side. I was gasping for air, not realizing what had happened. Then I saw Bekshinoff's face. He was saying something. I didn't understand, though I heard him. He tried to lift me to my feet. My legs wouldn't listen. I was vomiting. Red Army soldiers ran past us deep into the forest. It turned out that Bekshinoff heard the noise, came running and, putting the barrel of his rifle to the saboteur, shot him. In the divisional infirmary I had shields put on my left. The small radius was fractured. My head was buzzing from the blow. "Concussion," said the doctor. They bandaged the bruised head, treated the nail-scratched throat. My friends rushed into the tent. The division was building for a march, and they came to say goodbye. We hugged each other goodbye. Muhammadjan was touched and embarrassed. The division drew up and left, gone forever. And they put me in the cab of a truck and sent me to the rear. In Zolotonosha, in a normal hospital, they put a plaster cast on my arm instead of temporary shields. My head ached and buzzed. My left ear could not hear. "The eardrum is intact," said the doctor. Apparently the nerve was injured. I was sent to Kharkov by the first company train with red crosses on green cars. The whole platform was filled with people in festive clothes. A lot of flowers. A brass band was playing. Every sound echoed in my head with pain. We were the first wounded to arrive from the front. Later, when the war became everyday life, no one met the wounded. Only rare passers-by looked sadly after us. But now everything resembled a holiday. I was carefully supported on both sides by two orderlies, although I could have done without them. Proud of their mission, they led me through the festive crowd. Someone put a pouch of candy on my cast. Someone, a bunch of flowers. Someone, a glass of vodka. Vigilant orderlies removed it. In this festive confusion, I felt out of place. All the others were wounded in battle, and I in a stupid fight. From all this festive atmosphere, from the rumbling orchestra, from the welcoming smiles, I felt a little nauseous, sick and dizzy. Only when I was in the hospital on a bed, I could finally rest. I preferred not to talk about the circumstances of my wounding. From my fellow wounded, I learned about the tragedy of our army in the first weeks of the war. The suddenness of the German attack, the confusion and panic, the senseless heroism and death of our divisions, and the way our encircled armies surrendered to the Germans. I realized that Bekshinoff not only saved my life, but also saved me from senseless death in the chaos of the first battles and humiliating death in enemy captivity. For many years I persistently searched for Muhammadjan, my friend and saviour. But wherever I turned, I received no answer. In one of the battles we freed 17 Kazakhs from captivity. I asked each of them if they knew Muhammadjan Beksh. No, they didn't know him. When my movies began to be released, many of my fellow soldiers, acquaintances and strangers, found me. No one from this division responded. Only in the 90s I received a letter from Grisha Sumko's sister. She wrote that Grisha died a year and a half later. Where and how, it is unknown. Grisha was the oldest of us and the wisest, but not the wisdom that boasts itself, but a modest cock-lack mocking wisdom. Usually he listened to our conversations in silence, but if he spoke, everything became clear and funny. We all loved him. We loved Stepa Karnauk for his artistry. He had a beautiful voice. He sang Ukrainian songs so heartfelt and beautiful that they touched the heart. Sometimes we sang with him in two voices. Muk was loved for his cheerful disposition and respected for his unique abilities as a radio operator. Our bunks were next to each other in the barracks, and we went on dates together with girls from the Metallurgical Technical School. And every time I meet Kazakhs, I feel excitement. They are a living reminder of my friend. The young organism overcame the wounds. It was only his hearing that was in trouble. The hearing in my left ear never recovered. When I was worried, I lost my hearing completely. My right hand was healthy, and I volunteered to teach the easily wounded to receive Morse code signals by ear. Communicators were in short supply at that time. One day during class, a petty officer came into the classroom and told everyone to go out into the courtyard for an important event. In the yard there was a table covered with red kumak, on which the remains of some slogan were visible. Political information, I thought, and settled down on the grass not far from the table. At the table sat two civilians, between them a military man with glasses. They were talking animatedly about something, sometimes chuckling. A truck covered with a tent appeared. After driving across the lawn and crumpling the grass, it stopped at the table. Two Red Army soldiers with rifles jumped out of it, followed by two men in peasant clothes without belts. The military officer took on an official appearance and declared the session of the military tribunal open. Both defendants turned out to be residents of Western Ukraine, recently annexed to the Soviet Union. They were accused of refusing to take up arms. "Our faith is forbidden," explained the older defendant. The youngest, a boy in his 20s, agreed. The presiding officer invited those present to speak on the matter. The wounded were silent. "Speak out, comrades. Don't be shy," the chairman encouraged us. An amputee without one leg got up from a nearby bench. "We know these saints," he wheezed. "When we left the Baltics, they shot us in the back. Those are the soldiers," objected the accused, "and our faith doesn't allow it." The troika consulted, and the bespectacled man announced. For refusal to take up arms, the tribunal decided to award both to the highest penalty. "That's right," wheezed the amputee. The others were silent. The chairman asked the convicts about their last wish. The older one asked for borscht before his death. The younger one remained silent for a long time, then fell to his knees and begged to be spared. He was ready to take up arms. He would fight. "It's too late," said the chairman. "The decision is final and cannot be reconsidered." Then everyone, the condemned, the sentries and the assessors, climbed under the awning of the semi-truck. The chairman sat down in the cab next to the driver. The car, backing up, turned around and drove away. "Will they really shoot them?" I asked my neighbour petty officer. "What did you think?" He said, for some reason angrily. It was necessary to defend the motherland, but there was still a feeling of incomprehensible longing in my soul. Sometimes easily wounded men were released to the city vacation. I, too, asked the doctors to let me go, but as long as I had dizziness, they refused to let me go. When I felt better, they finally let me go with my fellow soldier, Mitya Krivtsov, entrusting Mitya to look after me. It was in vain. I could have done without his care. Nevertheless, we went into town together. Mitya was my age. He got along easily with people. He spoke with a slight Belarusian accent. He was from Vitebsk. So we got leave, and after the instruction of a senior officer from the battalion of convalescents, we went to the city. There were no gates at the hospital. Instead of them, the hospital yard was separated from the street by an arch. At the arch stood a sentry of old servicemen. He put on his glasses, scrutinized our discharge papers and said, "Go ahead." We went outside. We asked a passing old man how to get to the center. He looked at us for a long time, thinking about something, then pointed in the direction with his hand. "Go that way." The weather was good. A light breeze was blowing the leaves of acacia trees. Passers-by were walking along the street. A passing streetcar rumbled by. The life of the city did not remind of the war going on somewhere. A group of girls passed by. We stopped, hoping that one of them would pay attention to us and talk to us. But the girls, chirping merrily, flew past. The fakir was drunk. "The trick failed," said my comrade unhappily. Not far from us on the corner stood a poster board. We approached it. We were attracted by a poster announcing that the Ukrainian theatre would be holding an afternoon performance. Zaporozhets za Dunai. "Let's go and see it," Misha suggested. I had seen this play before the war, both in Sinelnikov and in Dnipropetrovsk, but I had no choice. At that time the sirens howled. On the radio there was a black loudspeaker on a pole. The announcer's voice wheezed in Russian and Ukrainian that an air alert was being declared. People, especially the elderly, hurried ran. The streetcar stopped halfway. People rushed out of it and also ran. We remained standing near the bollard, showing with all our appearance that we were not afraid of anything. However, no one paid attention to our heroism. People were in a hurry, anxiously looking up at the sky. What are they so afraid of? I thought. Only much later did I realize the difference between us and them. We were only responsible for our own lives, and they for the lives of their children. The street quickly emptied. Krivtsov and I stood with our heads back and looked up at the sky. Somewhere far away the anti-aircraft guns rumbled. Very close to us a machine gun rattled, but there were no enemy planes in sight. Suddenly there was an explosion. Then there was silence, and in a few minutes the same loudspeaker, clicking, wheezed that the air raid was over. In the street, people began to appear from back alleys, from houses, from the bomb shelter, and he gathered in clusters and discussed something. Krivtsov and I approached one such group. People were discussing where the bomb had fallen. Most of them named a street, the name of which told us nothing. A red-headed girl said to her friend, "I know where it is. Let's go look." "Girls, can we come with you?" Misha asked. The girls looked at us, one of them grudgingly. "Please." On the way we got to talking. The girls told us that there were a lot of spies in the city and that they were directing German airplanes to the city. One girl said, "They caught an old woman recently. An ordinary old woman, but for some reason she was carrying coloured pencils." That's how it was. We immediately thought it was for a reason. We detained the old lady and took her to the police. She turned out to be a spy. "Well, a spy at once," doubted Krivtsov. "Yes." The girl insisted. She, of course, justified herself, but the policeman said, "Well, if the policeman said, then she's definitely a spy," said Misha. The redhead took offence, pulled her friend by the arm and led her away. "Hey, go on your own, if you're so smart." We continued to look for the place where the bomb had fallen, asking passers-by. The bomb had hit an apartment building that had a large bookstore on the first floor. It perforated all the floors and exploded only at the bottom. Streams of clear water ran down the street between piles of brick rubble. Turks in Russian and Ukrainian were lying all over the street. Not far from the house, a bunch of witnesses and gawkers were excitedly discussing what had happened. I was reading the titles of the books. Suddenly I came across a thick book. It was written L.V. Kuleshov, Lessons of Film Direction. My heart trembled. I was so gripped by the war that I had forgotten about my dream of becoming a director. But seeing this book, I remembered everything again, and in me with a new force ignited the dream. I picked up the book. King was heavy, 1.5 kilograms or 2 kilograms, but I could not part with it and carried it in my duffel bag for a long time. This book determined my whole future life. Much later, leaving after formation for the front, I left it with my favourite girl, promising to return for it. My favourite girl, Irina Penkova, kept it. Then there was occupation and liberation. I returned for the book, married the girl, and went to the front again. But this is another story. Events unfolded rapidly and in the most unexpected way. In the morning my caste was removed. In the afternoon I was accepted as a candidate for the party, and an hour later I was already standing in the headquarters of the 1st Reserve Brigade of the Kharkov Military District in front of the desk of the major, who appointed me, a junior sergeant, commander of an infantry platoon. I could not hide I was flattered by the promotion, but I could not help saying that I am a radio operator by specialty and do not know infantry combat. Major, after listening to me, said tiredly, "If I had someone to appoint, I would not see you snotty at point-blank range. But I have no officers. You've been in the army for over a year, and in general," said the major, "orders are not discussed." I silently called out, turned around and left the office. On the street in front of the headquarters building my platoon was already waiting for me. They were only today mobilized workers of the Kharkov counter. They were still wearing civilian clothes. Their appearance saddened me. All of them were old enough to be my fathers. My appearance must not have made a favourable impression on them. We were taken to some mountain and given a plot to defend. The site was located on the crest of the mountain above the Kharkov-Sortyrivotchinaya station. The trenches here had been dug before us, but were not in the best condition. I took my bicycle and went to the abandoned barracks. There, in the empty rooms among various junk, I found a little book, Combat Regulations of Infantry, and, returning to my subordinates, read aloud how to equip the trenches. Dinner and uniforms were brought in. The company commander, an elderly man with a paunch, surnamed Katsiri, who had fought in the Civil War, took me out while people were eating to the field behind our trenches and said, "So, son, after dinner you will take your men to the bathhouse. You'll go straight through the wasteland." He pointed out the direction. "You'll see 2 chimneys. That's the bathhouse. Get your men suited up and go back to the trenches. Is that clear?" "Understood." It didn't bother me that he called me son. He really was old enough to be my father. Dinner dragged on till dark. I built my peddlers and led them across the vacant lot, trying not to lose my direction in the darkness. And the darkness was pitch black. You couldn't see anything, even if you poked your eyes out. I walked on, thinking about something of my own. Behind me I heard the footsteps of my subordinates. Then, when I came to my senses, I realized that I hadn't heard that sound for a long time. Gone are the peddlers, I say. I thought sinfully, but just in case I called out. "Guys, where are you?" "We're here." Turns out they weren't far from me. I came back to the voice. "What are you guys doing?" "We can't see you." "Warriors," I thought with contempt. Scared of the dark? In general, I treated my subordinates with restrained disdain. Throwing a white towel over my back, I asked, "Now do you see? Now we're sorting something out." I went ahead, proud of my idea, and in my heart calling my subordinates contemptuous names. At that time I considered myself a brave and experienced soldier, and them cowardly old men. We found a bathhouse, washed ourselves, put on new uniforms, and at dawn returned to our trenches. A semi-truck with rifles and ammunition arrived. I distributed the weapons and announced a stand-down. Among my subordinates there was one whom I did not despise as much as the others. His surname was Priya. He came to the recruiting station with his accordion and turned out to be a talented musician. And he was younger than the others. My peddlers, who were not used to sleeping in the trenches, could not fit in. Some of them groaned. And Priatko was quietly playing on his accordion the melody of a sad Ukrainian song because of the Kamyanaya mountain. Listening to this melody, I forgot myself. And suddenly there was a shock. Tanks. German tanks. I opened my eyes and looked down. At the Kharkov-Sortira-Vochnaya station, 3 tanks were slowly moving to the rails. "There is nothing to panic. These are our tanks," I calmly announced. Why would the Germans be? But the tanks shuddered and shells flew over our heads, rustling and hissing. One, another, into the gun, I heroically commanded. But all my soldiers fell to the bottom of the trench and lay motionless. I grabbed my rifle and started shooting at the tanks. The fire from the Germans intensified. Shells were flying through our trenches and my soldiers were idling. I shot back, ran around the trench, swearing and kicking my boots raised the morale of my old men. They rose to their feet, but as soon as I turned to the others, they were again at the bottom of the trench. Meanwhile, from our side the artillery began to work. Now our shells, hissing, flew over our heads and tore around the tanks. The noise of the battle was increasing. A fat man was lying in the corner of the trench wearing a gas mask upside down out of fear. I ran up to him and tore off the gas mask. The eyes that had lost their eyes from fear looked at me. "If all people were honest," he moaned, "then there would be no war." I spat with disgust and, grabbing my rifle, started shooting again. The tanks backed up, turned around and started to leave. There was a long silence and only the fat philosopher sobbed, wrapping his arms around his balding head. It was not long before one of my bargainers dared to look out from behind the trench berm, and I heard a victorious shout. "They're gone. We have won. Good winners," I thought. At a runch, a rumour spread. The Germans had been driven all the way to Poltava. My peddlers became bolder and began at first timidly, then louder and louder to condemn my behaviour. In the Red Army, it is not allowed to swear at subordinates with a swear word. And lying at the bottom of a trench and not shooting at the enemy is allowed. I objected. And kicking your subordinates with boots is allowed? And how else to do with you, if you do not want to fight? And then it burst. They all started talking at once, pressing on me and pushing each other away with their elbows. You taught us how to fight. I'm old enough to be your fathers, and you give me boots. Shoot. Do I know how? Do I know how to load a rifle from which side? And I have no idea, and you're cursing at me. I wish I lived like this. The resentment grew. They called me a hooligan and an anti-Semite and a mucknovist. I looked at their indignant faces and thought, if there is a real fight, they will run away and I will be tried. Judgment is not terrible. Dishonour is terrible. I must resolutely give up my post. I got up and went to the company commander. The headquarters was in a small building of grey bricks. Having listened to my arguments, Mikhail Semyonovich Cutsy sighed and said, "No, son, it won't work that way. Who would you appoint in your place? You know at least something and others nothing at all." "I don't know anything." "You'll learn. You think I know anything? I fought in the Civil War and now everything is different. I'll be on understand anything. But now that I've been appointed, there's nowhere to go. Go on, son, teach the class." I went back to my foxhole, and again I met with unfriendly looks. I looked at them like a mouse at the grits. So I started to teach them how to use the rifle. The future looked black and hopeless. But, as always, when it seemed there was no way out, fate came to my rescue, and so it was now. While I was speculating about my unhappy fate, boots on crooked feet appeared on the trench berm. I looked up and saw an unfamiliar major. "Oh, comrades fighters," the major said loudly, addressing us. "The Central Committee of the Komsomol announces the recruitment of volunteers in the airborne troops. Who of you wants?" I did not let him finish his sentence, and, raising my hand, shouted, I wish. Having written down my data, the major asked, "Are there more willing?" There were no more willing, and the major went to the other trenches. My subordinates looked at me in surprise. "Young man," said one of them, "do you have a mom? It's the same jump to the Germans the hell on their horns, but without you." I answered rudely. "What did we do to you? Did we curse you with bad words? Did we kick you in the ribs?" I answered nothing, but only thought. Cowards, merchants. I already felt like a paratrooper, and my imagination was painting me heroic pictures. I'm going down to the Sinelnikov breeding station. Here are my mother and stepfather. In my hands I have a machine gun. I'm shooting long bursts, sowing panic and death among the Germans. In Ukraine, they say about such a thing, some doom and doom car, which I was only 20 years old. The carriage is packed to the brim. People sit, lie down, who on suitcases, who on the floor, who on the third shelves. The musty air smells of diapers. You can hear children crying and laughing. It's our guys entertaining a beautiful Task Cossack girl. There are 5 of us, 5 future paratroopers. I am the eldest. I behave solidly, and the girl likes it. We're going to the city of Yeisk, to the 3rd Airborne Corps. And here, finally, the station Yeisk. We get out of the car. We ask a soldier with a red armband on his sleeve how to go to the airborne paratroopers. Address the commandant of the city. He answers, "I see a military secret." The soldier knows his business tight. We go out into the city. We find the military commandant's office. It's full of people. Everybody's got business. We have one question. I make my way through the crowd to the commandant's desk. "No. How do I get into the airborne corps?" "What corps?" I take out a direction, give it to the commandant. He reads it and gives it back to me. "We don't have any corps." I'm confused. "We're directed to you. Maybe you don't know." "I don't know how." "A corpse." 14,000 bastards. We don't have a corpse. Where can we go? I don't know. I don't know. My doubt? We're not imposters. Here's the direction. It's for you. A sergeant from the crowd surrounding the commandant interferes in our conversation. Sir, near the bazaar, there's a green gate. I've seen pilots. Maybe they know. Where's the bazaar? Everyone in town knows where the bazaar is. We find the bazaar and the green gate. It's wide open. A few guys in flight uniforms are sitting on crates smoking cigarettes. Guys, do you know where the airborne corpse is? We know, but we won't tell you. Really? Tell me. Military secret. Stop talking. In a commanding voice, a petty officer comes up. Here is the airborne corpse. Do you have a direction? I take out the direction and give it to him. He reads it and puts the paper in the breast pocket of his uniform. We should introduce ourselves to our superiors. I say, I am the boss, says the petty officer. I look at him. He doesn't seem to be lying, but I can't believe it. The petty officer commands the corpse? Saying, the corps is just being formed. The chiefs haven't arrived yet, the petty officer explains. Are you hungry? Yes, we are. Go that way. He pointed to the end of the yard. There, in the crates, you'll find bread and canned food. Eat as much as you want. And then what? We wait. We ate, slept. In the morning, 3 more groups of volunteers showed up. Then another and another. The groups arrived one after another, and there were more and more of us. With one large group, a captain came and as a senior officer took command. People were wandering around the city doing nothing. The commandant detained 2 drunken soldiers. We need to keep them busy. What kind of work? Gunnery practice, for instance. I wish we could, said the suspended petty officer, but there are no guns. Make models out of planks. The day after tomorrow, many fences in Yisk were missing their boards. All day long, with the help of knives and fins, the soldiers made models of rifles. Some did well, others worse, but the models were made. A day later, columns of soldiers were marching bravely through the streets of the city, singing the formation song, rattling with fire, glittering with the shine of steel. The cars will go on a furious march. When Comrade Stalin sends us into battle, and the first marshal will lead us into battle. The women looked at our armament and quietly wiped their tears. Soon a colonel appeared and led our army by seniority. The colonel came to us from the hospital after a severe contusion. He could not hear well, and to talk to him we had to shout. Gathering the senior groups, he interviewed them and appointed each to a temporary position. He cancelled the marching around the city with models instead of guns. He called me in, too. Name? You, Junior Sergeant Shukrai. I reported. I see. Military specialty? Liaison officer. Speak up. I can't hear very well. Miss Staff Sergeant. Signalman. I shouted. Good. You'll be my communications chief. Another promotion. I thought, the chief of communications of the corps by rank should be a colonel again, a temporary career boost. But I didn't take this promotion seriously anymore. The colonel settled in a small mansion not far from the bazaar. On the 2nd floor of the mansion was his office with a clerical desk and a single Viennese chair. In the corner, against the wall, stood an armoured safe with secret documents. In the next small room was a bedroom with an iron hospital bed. On the first was a large room with 5 iron bunks for me and my team. We had to take turns to be on duty at the telephone hanging on the wall in the corridor, to receive telephonograms and to shout their content to the deaf colonel. The colonel gave orders by telephone himself. To guard the safe with secret documents, we were given a single rifle of the 1891 model. We passed it to each other along with the change of duty. And the volunteers kept coming and coming. On the 3rd day, the sea was stormy. The waves seemed to pound the pier with anger. The cold wind forced the volunteers to wrap themselves in overcoats. At night, jets of downpour fell on the city from the sky. The wind threw handfuls of water through the windows, and they drummed against the panes. I sat under the only lamp by the telephone and read Heinrich Heine. Suddenly, there was a persistent knock at the door. Gofar Alik Perov, who was on duty at the telephone, looked at me questioningly. What could it mean? The knock on the door was repeated insistently, and anxiously I went to the door. Whoa! Someone was shouting in reply, but I couldn't understand the words because of the rain and wind. I took the key. Gofar pointed the barrel of his rifle at the door. Come on! A cold wind and splashing water blew in through the open door. A sailor in a calfskin coat stood in the doorway, water streaming off him. Pushing me aside, he entered the lobby and slamming the door behind him with force. Shout, "Where's the chief? Give me the chief." "The colonel is asleep." "Ida Gofar, Einzig Gofar. Take away the gun, you bastard." He swam across the strait. "We need the chief urgent." From the sailor's agitated tone and look, we realized that something important had happened. "Let's go," I said. "Let's wake him up." Going up the stairs, we stopped in front of the colonel's door. "Wait here," I said to the sailor. "I will report." The sailor nodded assent, and I noticed that he was shivering with cold and impatience. The colonel woke up, sat on the bed in his underclothes. "What is it?" "There's a sailor here to see you." "Urgent." "Urgent? Get the sailor." I opened the door. "Go on. But speak loudly, he's shell-shocked, he can't hear well." "I'm from the other side." The sailor hurriedly reported. "I swam across the strait. We need weapons." The colonel looked at the sailor in silence. It seemed that he did not quite understand him. The sailor shouted louder than before. "I'm from the other side. Berdiansk School of Military Sailors. The Germans are approaching the city. Give me your weapons. We'll die, but we won't give up the city." The colonel was silent. "Can't you hear me?" The sailor was indignant. "I have no weapons, lad," said the colonel quietly. "So, how not? Young guys, they'll die without a fight. At least give me some rifles." The colonel shouting. "I have only one rifle for the whole corps." "One for the whole corps. Do you understand?" The sailor, not understanding, looked at the colonel. "I'd give you the last of it. But I don't, and I don't have anyone to take it from." The sailor stared at him without understanding. Then suddenly he turned and walked tiredly to the door. He suddenly burst into tears, sending terrible curses to someone. When, after the war, the newspapers wrote that I am preparing a movie about the war, I received a letter from the head of the rear of General Sokol. He took offense at the press accusing his department of lack of weapons. The general proved with figures that we had enough weapons. But weapons in a warehouse don't fire themselves. People needed weapons, and where they were needed, they were in short supply. Facts, not statistics, are important. On the third day, the downpour stopped. The sun appeared, but the sea was still churning. Early in the morning we heard a burst. The phone rang. Messerschmitts raided the pier, bombing and shooting civilians. What civilians? Where did they come from on the pier? Hey, people from the other side. They crossed the strait at night. They were running away from the war, but they didn't run away. We told the colonel loudly. He listened to us in silence. What could he do? There were no anti-aircraft guns, let alone fighter planes in Yeisk. He and I wanted to go to the pier, but the order came to urgently load the personnel into wagons and go to the North Caucasus. She had to have time to load a heavy safe with documents. Not an easy thing to do. We had to confiscate bicycles from the inhabitants and load them into the train. We managed to do it all in time. Chemists who were on the pier told us later. Messerschmitts came unexpectedly, shot people on a glancing flight. They acted cruelly and with impunity. Many children and women were killed. The whole pier was in blood and corpses. I did not see it all. I was loading, but I was worried as if I had witnessed the massacre. I'd been to this town as a kid. It was a cheerful resort town. I didn't recognize it now. The same streets, the same green park, but the streets are not cheerful and deserted. Sometimes a person appears but immediately hides behind some door. There are no vacationers. The sanatoriums have been turned into hospitals. Residents complain. There is no life from the wounded. It's better for women and girls not to show their faces on the street. Men are beaten. Money is taken away. They get into drunken fights. They don't give them knives. They fight with forks. The chief of police who tried to break up a drunken brawl was killed with forks. The corps commander called soldiers who knew hand-to-hand combat and ordered to restore order in the city in 3 days, if necessary, to use force and weapons. I thought, weapons to the wounded. They have suffered in defense of the motherland. And as if in response to my thoughts, the commander said, "They are not defenders of the homeland but bandits." I cannot in such an environment to prepare paratroopers for the upcoming battles, for liberalism will be strictly punished. We got down to business and in 2 or 3 days brought order. It was strange that a small group of bandits terrorized the whole city. The debauchees resisted, shook their rights, threatened us with pitchforks, tried to evoke sympathy. We are wounded. We, too, defended our homeland and were lying in hospitals, but we didn't rob and debauch. We reacted without sentimentality, cruelly if necessary, but we brought order. And the city breathed freely. Girls considered the paratroopers heroes, doctors thank. And this. These kids come in and threaten us with pitchforks. If you talk, we'll poke your eye out. They demand alcohol and drugs. And you do. You don't want to lose an eye. The head nurse of the hospital was killed for refusing to unlock the cupboard where bottles of alcohol were kept. A gang of bandits. Thank you. Now we can treat the wounded. That was my first clear lesson in humanism. If you want to be a humanist, first eliminate bandits and thieves. This is the most humane action of those who really dream of freedom and democracy. While I was healthy, I wrote and spoke at public meetings that we don't need a 7-fingered president now. We need a president who can restore order. And then we can elect a 7-footer. Of course, a huge country is not like a small resort town, but nevertheless it is possible to restore order in the country. For this purpose we need strong power. Only strong power is capable of implementing democratic reforms. A weak one will be trampled on for years. It had to be proved, though life has already proved it. But our society is in a state of moral devastation, and people listen to fairy tales of Democrats who robbed them. Fairy tales about how now they, Democrats, will make us happy. Democracy in turmoil can only increase turmoil. Democracy under law and order can create the conditions for a country to prosper. Every time I said this, a democratic howl went up. Strong arm. We have already eaten it. We do not need a new Stalin. We already had one. And all sorts of other progressive words to which the country's wealth was most successfully plundered and its spiritual values destroyed. I agree that dictatorship is dangerous, but I am not in favor of a Stalinist dictatorship. Wasn't I the first in the Soviet Union, having deceived my superiors and censors, to make an anti-Stalinist movie Clear Sky at my own risk? And during Perestroika I created the movie Stalin and War. I hate Stalinism and have spoken out against it, when it was dangerous and when others were silent. But I am neither dogmatic about socialism nor dogmatic about democracy. I believe that dictatorship can be non-Stalinist, that it can also be a stepping stone to democracy. For a dangerously sick society, democratic exhortations are useless. Thieves, bandits, murderers recognize only force. When a person has cancer, surgery must be performed. It involves pain and blood, but it is necessary. It's also dangerous. There's no guarantee that the patient will survive, but you have to take the risk. Of course, you can limit yourself to persuasion, but then the patient will definitely die. People do not realize the state of their country. They have no time to think about it, no time to generalize. Robbed 4 times by their Democratic government, tormented by their own grief Democrats, mutilated by television, which shows day after day how dashing and cheerful it is to kill. People are scurrying around in search of their daily bread. They know that everyone who can steals, but they treat it indulgently. We steal too, otherwise we can't survive. And the country is dying, and the authorities are unable to protect citizens from the arbitrariness of thieves, officials, racketeers and police, and the desire of foreigners near and far to make a profit at our expense and humiliate us. The weak are beaten, and our thieves are ready to rob anyone on any territory. So we put the city in order and began our training. We were taught to really fight, to survive in extreme conditions, to shoot accurately from any position, to throw knives, to group up when falling, to parachute jump and other military wisdom. Today, I think, the country was on the verge of destruction. The Germans were approaching Moscow. And here in the Caucasus, we were taught to really fight. Someone had to organize it. The airborne troops didn't organize themselves. Someone must have foreseen that they would be needed. In clear weather, white parachute domes bloomed in the sky like flowers. From afar, it was beautiful. But the next day in the city, there were sounds of morning march. They buried soldiers who died in training. The losses were great, the Politruki said. We're learning a new business. Losses are inevitable. Igorek, our elderly parachute instructor, only sighed heavily, and once told us under great secrecy that this business is not new at all. That in 1932 Tukhachevsky and Uborovich on maneuvers near Kiev showed parachute landing, that foreign diplomats and military attaches opened their mouths in amazement. But then Tukhachevsky, Uborovich, Kork and other prominent military men were accused of treason and shot. Following them, many parachute instructors were killed. He himself survived only because he dislocated his leg on landing and was hospitalized. That's why now there is a shortage of experienced instructors. Igorich was silent and asked, "Only you guys, keep quiet. Otherwise I'm dead." That night I couldn't sleep. I remembered 1938 and the exposure of the group of military traitors. Tukhachevsky, Yakir, Uborovich, Kork. We were already living in Moscow then. My mother, having learned about the betrayal of Tukhachevsky's group, was depressed. "It's strange," she said. Tukhachevsky was an outstanding commander of the Civil War, and she sighed heavily. Then, looking at me, she added, "People sometimes cheat themselves." And on the streets played bands. Newspapers stigmatized despicable traitors, and the workers demanded to destroy them like rabid dogs. There was a rally in our school too. Representatives of the district committee and the Department of Public Education. Our teachers also spoke. Everyone said the same thing. Death to dogs. I was at that time an active Komsomol member and spoke too. What luck, I said, that our organs discovered and neutralized the traitors. It is frightening to imagine what might have happened in the event of war. To myself at that time I seemed advanced and principled. Today I am ashamed of these words. Today I know that Tukhachevsky was not only an outstanding commander of the Civil War, but also a talented builder of our army. He owned the initiative to use parachute landings in the war. He first proposed the use of tank formations in the war. He supported scientists developing jet weapons. Tukhachevsky's group believed that war with the Germans was inevitable. Stalin hoped to pit Hitler against the capitalist West, believing that Hitler will get bogged down in this war, while we continue to build socialism in the meantime. Tukhachevsky's group interfered with this cunning plan as a report to animate the group of Tukhachevs. Stalin had personal motives. During the Civil War, they, talented and successful, were closer to him to power, which he greedily sought. In addition, they knew him, Stalin, the price, and interfered with their mere presence. Life has shown that they were right, not him. Hitler did not get bogged down in the war in the West. He, having deceived Stalin, attacked us. All the ideas and undertakings of Tukhachevsky were successfully used in the Great Patriotic War. I also know that the sheets of Tukhachevsky's interrogation protocols are drenched with his blood. I am also guilty of this blood. It is painful and shameful for me to recall my words and the situation of general hysteria that swept the country. There's no excuse for it. Our company was placed in a small mansion, not far from the Medsandtrud Club, a long one-story building that looked like a barn. This club hosted dances on weekends, and paratroopers often spent their free evenings there. I used to come to the dances too. If there was no girl in the club that interested me, I could stand at the wall all evening, but never asked anyone. But this night was special for me. Among the dancers, I noticed a new girl who made a big impression on me. When I noticed her, I even got excited. She was sitting with her friends. Her sweet, beautiful face radiated calm kindness, and I was pleased to look at her. But I didn't dare to ask her to dance. I saw a guy from our company, Vanya Terran, heading towards her. He approaches her and talks to her like an old acquaintance. We played another record, and he asked her girlfriend to dance. I was surprised. Why not her? If I were him, I wouldn't have asked anyone but this girl. When the dance was over and Vanya was escorting his partner to her seat, I grabbed his hand and excitedly asked, "Ivan, who is this girl?" "My partner." "No, the one next to her. The one you were talking to, Irina Penkova. We went to college together." "Introduce me." I saw how, having escorted his partner back to her seat, Vanya spoke to the same girl. She shot her eyes in my direction and immediately turned away, hiding her interest in me. But for me that look was a whole event. Then Vanya Taran, as if casually strolling through the hall, brought me to her and introduced me. And, of course, I asked her to dance. I don't remember what we talked about while dancing. I only remember that I asked her why I hadn't seen her before. We were in the trenches, digging anti-tank ditches, she explained. After the dance, I went to see her off. Her younger sister, Lyuba, was with her. And again we talked about something, and this conversation had a special, only to us understandable, deep meaning. I did not want to part with her. I asked her, "When will we meet again?" "I don't know," she replied, embarrassed. "Let's meet again in 3 days," Nuba suggested. "Where?" "At the city movie theatre." Lyuba took the initiative in this matter. For 3 days I didn't walk, but flew, waiting for a date. What a movie theatre, I thought. In the Green Theatre there will be a big concert. I'll invite her there. Having spent all my money on 2 tickets, I dressed up. The guys dressed me with the whole group. Who gave me a new uniform, who put a watch on my arm, who gave me his boots. The boots were a little small, but chrome, not soldiers. What you can't do to please a girl. I decided I'd put up with it, so I went on my date. But I had no luck that evening. On the way out of the barracks, I met Company Commander Vasily Ivanovich Nevstrev. "Where are you going, Senior Sergeant?" "To the city, Comrade Captain." "Do you have a leave of absence?" "No leave of absence." I hesitated. "The officers have left." "Why were you so dressed up?" "I'm in a hurry. I have a date with a nice girl." Nevstrev was a kind commander. "Well, if it's a nice girl," he said, smiling, "go ahead. If a patrol stops you, sigh." With the permission of the company commander, I didn't finish the conversation. I looked at my watch. There was not much time left before the meeting. I ran to the cinema and then realized my mistake. My boots were stinging mercilessly. It was unbearably painful to run in them. I ran to the movie theatre. Irina was gone. Must be waiting for me in the foyer. I went into the foyer. The checker wouldn't let me in. I went to the box office. No tickets. I went to the receptionist. No tickets. 1 ticket? My life depends on it. I begged. Well, if life... The administrator took out some book and, taking his time turning the pages, began to look for a ticket, saying, well, if life depends. Finally, having found the ticket, he gave it to me. No money. I run into the foyer and she's gone. She's obviously gone into the auditorium. I'm in the auditorium. I'm walking down the aisle looking for her in the rows. Irina's not here. She didn't show up. I was disappointed after standing near the theatre and not waiting for her, limping. I weave to the Green Theatre. I hope to sell tickets, but there are no one willing to buy. To hell with them, with tickets. I want to leave. Suddenly some girl, I saw her at a dance, asks for an extra ticket. I have an extra one. How much? She asks me the price. I show her the tickets. When she saw the price, she even shrieked. Oh, how expensive. I was embarrassed. I offer such tickets to a student. I'm justifying myself. I'm not selling. I'm inviting. Let's go together. But it's so expensive. Elder's waiting for my girlfriend, but she didn't, I explain. We enter the auditorium. My travelling companion asks, "Why are you limping like that?" I landed badly. I thought of it right away. We sit down in our seats. Our neighbours, owners of expensive tickets, look at us with suspicion. A general with his wife and an old man in a fancy suit. Before the war, the best artists traditionally came to Esentuki. They still do. But I didn't care about the concert. I thought, why didn't she come? At intermission, I noticed that some young couple was looking at us and smiling badly. Why are they looking at us like that? Asks my travelling companion. I don't know. And the young couple is heading straight towards us, and the girl, having measured my travelling companion with a glance, says to me, "Here you are, it turns out where you are. And Irina and I were waiting for you at the movie theatre." I feel like a criminal caught in the act and try to explain something. But she just nods meaningfully. I mean, we know you. The bell rings and the second half of the concert begins. And again I look at the stage and see nothing. I just think, how unfortunate it all turned out. I'm ashamed and hurt. I feel endlessly guilty before Irina and afraid of losing her. When the concert is over, I, having apologized to my travelling companion, approach Irina's girlfriend. "I'm begging you. Tell Irina that it's a misunderstanding, and I'll be waiting for her on Sunday at the club." All the days until Sunday, I'm thinking how to explain to Irina what happened to me. And the more I think, the more I despair. Everything is very improbable. Will she believe me? On Sunday, tormented by doubts, I go to the club. Irina is there. I approach her and ask her to dance. She agrees as if nothing had happened. We dance, and I keep thinking how to start a conversation that's difficult for me. Finally, I decide. I start babbling some words. "Let's not talk about it." Irina interrupts me. I look at her. Why did she say that? Is she offended? No. She's smiling at me. She really doesn't want to talk about this nonsense. God, what a girl. She's so nice and easy to be with. I rejoice. It's like a mountain has been lifted off my shoulder. I see her off and again dare to ask when we'll meet. We agree in a week at the city library. Sunday is a week away. I was holding a hand-to-hand combat class in front of our mansion. Usually a crowd of curious people gather to watch the class. Suddenly in this crowd I noticed Irina and Luba. That's when I decided to spread my peacock tail to show what I can do. I spectacularly took away from an imaginary opponent knife, disarmed the enemy sentry, threw over myself big guys, and I got so carried away that I didn't notice when the girls left. We ate in the canteen of the fighter company. In the mornings we walked to the canteen past the station, through the wasteland. Nevstriev instructed me to lead the line. Irina was in a hurry to catch an electric train. Usually we met her on the vacant lot, and I exchanged a glance or a few words with her. These moments made me happy for the whole day. Approaching our formation, she would hear only ch-ch and realize that it was about me and her. Pavlusha Krenz in this camping. Pavlusha Kermes, Zhora Kondrashov and Leshka Motsak. I introduced them to Irina, and one day we all went together to the Green Theatre for a concert. My friends liked Irina. In a small town where everyone knows about everyone, the rumour spread that Irina walks with simple soldiers. Public opinion believed that Irina, with her looks, should have picked up at least an officer. Irina knew this, but paid no attention. My friends were more interesting to her than many officers. Once, it's already early spring. In Pyatigorsk at the train station she met Leshka Motsak. He asked her why she was here. She told him that she was waiting for her father, with whom she was to meet at the station, that she had been waiting for him for a long time and was freezing in her light coat, and that he was unlikely to come today. The train came. "What if your father shows up?" Leshka asked. "You'll tell him that I couldn't wait any longer. I got cold and went home." "And how will I recognize him?" "He will be out of season in felt boots." Irina left. Soon a man in felt boots appeared at the station. Leshka went up to him. "Aren't you Irina's father?" Yes, that was Irina's father. He made a date with her, but he was detained at the military registration office. He's leaving for the front tomorrow. He wants to say goodbye to his daughter. He'll wait for her here for another 2 hours. Leshka took the first train to Isentuki, but he didn't know where Irina lived. Pavlusha Kermas and Zora Kondrashov knew that. There was no time to lose. They ran across town to Irina's house. When they arrived, she was gone and the house was locked. They should have left a note. They reasoned that if the father meets his daughter at the train station in another city, it means that he and her mother are divorced. In order not to create unnecessary problems, Paul wrote her a note in German. Irina and her mother returned home in the morning. They were at her aunt's house. Read the note, but it was too late. Her father left for the front, and a few months later came the news that Pavel Konstantinovich Penkov died a brave death near Smolensk. I anxiously awaited a date, but an hour before the date Nevsky Ave ordered to send Kermas and me with a new radio eye in the headquarters of the corps. The time of the date coincided with the time of the call. Still, I found 10 minutes to run into the library. Irina was waiting for me at the table where an electric lamp under a lampshade was burning. In its light, Irina was very beautiful, and I admired. When I ran to the corps headquarters, Kermas was already in place and waiting for me. The adjutant went to report our arrival and soon invited us to the general's office. In the office sat another major and a man in civilian clothes. "We decided to entrust you with a responsible task," said the general. "We have lost contact with the Enya partisan detachment. You must jump to the location of the detachment with a radio RB and restore communication. You'll get your call signs on the spot. And you, Sergeant," the general turned to Kermas, "should try to establish a partisan radio. They say you're good at it. Can you do it?" "Try, Comrade General." "No, Comrade to classification." "Nikolai Nikolaevich, you," the civilian said. "He's in charge. Execute all his demands. A rickety Fordic delivered us to the airfield." Nikolai Nikolaevich was silent the whole time. "We were placed in some warehouse and asked to wait. And now let's get acquainted," he suggested, smiling. We introduced ourselves. After listening to us carefully, he told us about himself. Before the war, he taught Russian language and literature in a Kalmyk secondary school. He loves Kalmykia, knows its history. His wife is Kalmyk. He was not taken into the army because of his illness. He has tuberculosis. He writes essays for the local newspaper. Sometimes he's published in Krasnaya Zvezda. He's been to the partisans, where we're going twice. They know him there. His Kalmyk pupils are now in the army. They often write him letters. He has a son and a daughter in Kalmykia. They study in a Russian school. "And why?" I asked. "Don't the Kalmyks study in their own language?" He smiled. "It's understandable. If a young man graduates from a Kalmyk school, he can work only in Kalmykia. And if he graduates from a Russian one, he can work in the whole territory of the Soviet Union. Besides, through the Russian language, for example, I am introducing Kalmyks to the great Russian literature, and this is a great wealth. We have a saying, 'One language is one life, 2 languages are 2 lives.' The Kalmyks have their own poetry. He loves it for its peculiar colouring and wisdom, but he who knows Russian literature is twice as rich." A man in flight overalls entered the warehouse and interrupted our conversation. "The plane has arrived." Come out to the field. It turned out that there was already cargo in the U-2 airplane, and all three of us would not fit in it. We'll split into 2 flights. You will fly with me with the radio, and Sergeant Kermaz will come on the second flight. The main thing now is to establish communication as soon as possible, and repairs can wait, said Nikolai Nikolaevich. Evil and I were upset, but obeyed the decision of the senior officer. The man in overalls helped to spin the propeller. The airplane sprinted across the field and gained altitude. Under the wing of the plane showed signal fires in the form of an equilateral triangle. Nikolai Nikolaevich climbed out on the wing, pushed off, and flew down. I jumped after him. Already in the air I saw how his parachute opened, how it was picked up by the wind and carried somewhere to the side. When he reached the ground, Nikolai Nikolaevich hit the ice, broke through it and disappeared under the water. Having landed, I quickly unbuckled my parachute, took off my radio and rushed to help the senior, but after running about 10 meters I also fell under the ice. Partisans pulled us out of the water. We understuck. We had to move in order not to freeze, but in the wind our clothes iced up and we could not move. We were put on parachute cloths and dragged into the forest. There, in a hot, heated forest guardhouse, we were undressed, wrapped in tulupas, and our clothes were hung over the stove to dry. By morning our clothes were dry. We got dressed, wrapped ourselves in tuluks, and went by sledges to the forest to the detachment. There I unfolded the radio and restored the lost connection. Nikolai Nikolaevich and the detachment commander immediately used it. Partisan radio operators turned out to be smart guys and quickly mastered the new radio. I began to fix the partisan radio. The work was not going well. Everything fell out of my hands. My head hurt. My forehead was hot. I realized that I was getting sick, so I went to the medical dugout. There the nurse took my temperature. The temperature was high, and I was left in the dugout. Soon Nikolai Nikolaevich was brought into the dugout and laid on a neighboring bed. He greedily gulped air, flared his nostrils, soon forgot himself and fell asleep. In the morning the plane with Kermaz arrived. We decided to send us to the big land, but Nikolai Nikolaevich refused. The sergeant has completed his task. He said about me, I have not yet. But your condition is serious. You need to be treated, said the sister. Don't worry, sister. You can't even beat me with a stick. My father bathed in an ice hole until he was old. But he was naked, and you are in your clothes, said the sister. Don't persuade me. I won't go. By evening, Kermaz fixed the local radio, and we flew together to Essenchuki. There I was admitted to the hospital. Nikolai Nikolaevich, unfortunately, overestimated his strength. A month later he died. I was found to have pneumonia. My friends often visited me. But lately there were exercises, and only our son of the regiment, Sashka, visited me. He was from Belarusia. His mother and father were shot by the Germans before his eyes. When he talked about it, he stuttered. We tried to distract him from his heavy memories and asked him to sing us a song. He sang well. He used to bring me company news and funny stories. When he told them, he was choking with laughter. This time he told me that Lieutenant Semenyushkin was transferred to the infantry because he was a coward. As soon as he sees an airplane, he says, "My coffin is flying." So he was transferred. And Bokov, he likes to eat, saw a foreign box from the petty officer, thought it was candy and ate it all at once, but it was a laxative. He pissed his pants. And Sashka laughed so infectiously that the whole ward was dying of laughter. After telling all the news, Sashka leaned over to my ear and whispered, "Motamagachu Kadei will come your art in your day." And that's right. Irina came. The old doctor didn't let her in at first. We don't let outsiders in. Who are you to him? Nobody. Irina confessed and blushed thickly. The doctor sympathized with her embarrassment. All right. Go if you're nobody. The nurse told me that later. Irina, embarrassed, sat by my bed, asked me about my health and left. The patients commented on her arrival for a long time, and I was happy. Love does wonders. I recovered quickly, and I was discharged from the hospital. In the evening, Captain Nevsky gathered us and said, "Guys, tomorrow we're going to the front. Only the town mustn't know about it. A military secret." That evening I met Irina. "Tomorrow you are sent to the front?" she asked anxiously. I honoured the military secret. "What do you mean? What front?" "The whole town already knows." Good military secret, I thought, but I still denied the rumours. In the morning the whole town saw us off. Irina saw us off too. Spring of 1942. The remnants of our defeated armies were moving eastward. Hundreds of enterprises, property of collective and state farms, civilian population were moving from the frontline regions to the rear of the country. The situation resembled the defeat of our army at the beginning of the war. The country was losing vast territories, millions of people, huge material values. Spring was marked by a general retreat. The fact that the defeat of the German army near Moscow thwarted plans for a lightning war, and for a long war the Germans did not have enough resources, in particular gasoline. Angry Hitler removed from command his prominent generals and himself headed the German armed forces. With the help of disinformation, he managed to convince our command that in the spring of 1942 he would strike a blow on the Central Front, bypass Moscow from the south and turning to the north, cut it off from the Urals, our military-industrial complex. Such a plan, had it materialized, would have put us in a difficult position. But Hitler's actual plan was far more insidious. In order to win this war, it was not necessary to destroy the enemy's manpower. It was enough to deprive the army of oil and gasoline. Deprived of fuel, airplanes will not take to the air. Tractors carrying artillery, tanks and vehicles bringing ammunition will stop, and the country, deprived of fuel, will be defeated, wanting to seize the military initiative. We were the first to strike on the Central Front, but were defeated in the Kharkov area and lost a large number of manpower, weapons and ammunition. And Hitler with huge forces rushed south for the Caucasian oil and to Stalingrad, a communications hub through which the Caucasian oil flowed. On the way of the Germans there were no our troops. Our main forces and reserves were concentrated south of Moscow. According to all the canons of military science, the Soviet Union had to fall. Japan, preparing for war against our country, increased the strength of the Kwantung Army in Manchuria. At the Soviet borders, Turkey concentrated 28 divisions. At this time our corps was on Taman. The troops of the 47th Army were leaving Crimea through the Kerch Strait. We covered their retreat. The crossing of the retreating troops was under continuous enemy fire. Enemy airplanes were circling over the strait, throwing bombs. Exploded and went to the bottom of small boats and large ships. From the enemy shore on the retreating beat long-range artillery, the Germans threw airborne landings. They hoped to seize a bridgehead on the Taman coast, lock and destroy the retreating army. Previously, they had succeeded. So in the first months of the war, they completed the defeat of our armies. But now we knew how to fight, and no matter how great were our losses, successfully destroyed the German landings. The battles were brutal and bloody. In one of such battles, in the area of Temryuk, I was wounded. A splinter cut only soft tissues of the left leg. I did not want to go to the hospital from the unit where you are known, to lose comrades to whom I owed my life and who owed the same to you. We knew that our corps was being withdrawn from the battle and transferred to another front. I and 2 other lightly wounded men made sure that we were not sent to the hospital, but were left to be treated at the divisional medical unit. In the first days of July 1942, we were urgently transferred from Taman to the city of Kalich-on-Don, to the 7th Reserve Army, soon transformed into the 62nd Army of the Stalingrad Front. Our airborne corps was renamed the 33rd Rifle Division, but we continued to call ourselves paratroopers. I could already move around leaning on a stick. Vasily Ivanovich Nevstruev decided to send me on a business trip to the town of Issentuki. I was to bring spare parts for the out-of-service radios left in the warehouse there, having received the necessary documents and a parcel for Nevstruev's family. I went to the place of destination by hitchhiking. In Essentuki, we stood for several months. There many of us became friends with local girls. There, at the end of the 41st, I met Irina, my present wife. Then Essentuki would be captured by the Germans. I'd lose sight of her. When Essentuki is liberated, I will find her again, and in the 44th year, after one operation behind enemy lines, I will get a 2-week vacation, come to Essentuki, get married and go to the front again. All this will be later. Now I had a chance to see her, and I was happy. Some of the soldiers gave me letters to pass on. Some of them asked me to tell about the death of their comrades. I myself witnessed the deaths of many and could tell about them. There were suburban trains from Minvody station to the resort towns. At Pyatigorsk station I met Lyuba, Irina's younger sister. She was returning to Yessentuki. We were happy to meet unexpectedly. From Pyatigorsk to Essentuki was about half an hour's ride. Standing in the vestibule of the car, we animatedly questioned each other. I about Irina, about life in the rear, she about the familiar guys. Here, obviously from the wounded, was known about the great losses of our division. Everyone passed from mouth to mouth someone's words. The strait was red with blood. Usually rumour exaggerates events, but it was close to the truth. I don't remember what else we talked about, but I remember that we decided to play a trick on Irina. When we arrived in Essentuki, it was already evening. The town was darkened. At the door to the house, Lyuba put on my cap, took my duffel bag behind her back, and throwing her overcoat over her arm, entered the house. There she announced that she had been drafted into the army and was now leaving for the front. Her mother and Irina were distraught. "How can it be? You are still young. How can you be useful at the front?" "To give first aid to the wounded," Lyuba answered cheerfully. The mother cried. And then Lyuba confessed that these were not her things, and that I was waiting for Irina in the yard. Irina ran out, hugged me in joy, and clung to me trustingly. I was excited. I saw that Irina's mother, Elena Tikhonovna, was pleased with me too. Treats appeared on the table, krible, corn, bread and tea. I took out of my duffel bag the delicacies of the wartime. Real black bread, a can of stew and a few pieces of sugar. The dinner turned out to be a royal one. At dinner I began to ask questions. What happened to my leg? How was it at the front? Is anything known about my parents? I was accepted here not as a stranger, and it was dear to me. I was put to sleep on the floor of the only small room. The daughters went to bed with their mother. I couldn't sleep for a long time. If I stay alive, I thought, I will come to Essentuki and marry Irina. For the first time in my life, I had a concrete thought of marriage. I imagined how good it would be. That both she and Elena Tikhonovna would agree to my proposal, I had no doubt, not because I was an arrogant young man, but because I could feel their attitude to me. But immediately the rainbow dreams were replaced by reality. The words "if I stay alive" took on a tangible meaning. Before I had realized that I could die, but this understanding was abstract. Now I felt with all my being that I too, like others, it did not frighten me. I only thought, why spoil the girl's life, and it will not be easy for me to fight. I'll get married if I'm alive. What if I'm crippled, without a leg or an arm? Came to my mind. What then? I vividly visualized myself as a cripple, and decided that then I will try to disappear from Irina's life. Let her better think that I am not in the world. People marry for happiness, and what happiness to live with a cripple. So I thought, lying on the floor in the room of my future wife, and in my thoughts was not a shadow of self-pity. To be killed or to remain a cripple was a greater reality than to remain alive. I loved Irina. I loved life. But like many of my peers, I believed that there are things for which you can die. But the fatigue and the wound shriveled me up, and I fell asleep. In the morning I went to the warehouse and found a crate of spare parts. There I was pounced on with questions about a soldier I didn't know. "Tell the truth. Don't you know Alexei? He's in your corps." It was hard for me to explain that I wasn't hiding anything. There are about 14,000 guys in the corps. It's impossible to know them all. Then I visited Nevstru's family and handed over a parcel. The joy was indescribable. My wife and children didn't know where to sit me. They asked me to tell them about Vasily Ivanovich. I told them, and the woman, teary-eyed with joy, kept repeating, Thank God. Thank God. They told such horrors about your battles here. Would you like some tea? You must be hungry." She wanted to treat me to the meagre food that Vasily Ivanovich had sent. I politely declined and hurried away. I had to visit several more families to send greetings, good and bad news. Good news is easy to pass on. At that time, people rejoiced even if they heard the word wounded. They did not know that another wound is worse than death. People always live in hope for the best, and wounded is still hope. But how can you say the word dead and kill hope forever? Not to say it, withhold or lie? I didn't know why, but I felt in my heart that it was a sin. I myself wished that those who cared for me would know where and under what circumstances I had left this world. They would have learned it from a living witness, not from the meagre letters of a funeral. Oh, how hard this mission was for me. In battle, a man kind of dulls, and the pain of loss there is not so acute. It's a protective reaction of the organism. Without it, one could go crazy. The real reaction to the experience comes later, when the battle is over and you find yourself in a hospital or in a relatively calm environment. That's when the details of the battle and the death of comrades resurface in your memory with all the sharpness, and many details of the experience cause you pain and horror. It is difficult to say the fateful word, but you must. And you say it and try to hold back the trembling of your own lips, trying not to sour. You are a man. You recently turned 22. In these bitter moments you feel something guilty he died, and you, alive, standing in front of a woman, killed by grief the shard that wounded you. He is not sighted. He could have hit you in the head, in the heart, and you could be dead now. But he's dead, and you're alive, and you feel guilty. You can't get rid of this feeling. You can't erase it. You can't get it out of your head. It's with you for life. So, spreading joy and sorrow, I completed my mission, said goodbye to everyone, took the box with spare lamps and returned to my unit. Irina saw me off all the way to Minvod. She was wearing a light-coloured dress with frills on her chest. Her hair was golden from the sun. It seemed to me that everyone around, like me, admired her. I was proud and in love. I was happy. Here, our much-thinned division was replenished with new fighters and prepared for new battles. There was a shortage of officers. A lot of them had fallen on Taman. The command assigned officer ranks to the fighters who had been in the battles and showed themselves well. My friend Pavel Kermes and I were promoted to the rank of junior lieutenant. I was appointed commander of the division radio platoon, and Pavel, head of the division radio station. War is war. But when spring comes, buds blossom, trees are covered with leaves, and the earth somehow smells in a special way. And to a man, when he is 20 years old, comes the time of love. And I was not the only one who was in love at that time. My friend Pavlusha fell in love with Tanya Lisishkina, whom he met in Kalak. How modestly and beautifully he experienced his falling in love. Then in our relations with girls there was no shadow of today's cynicism. The town of Kalak is about 120 kilometers west of Stalingrad. Replenished with new personnel, our division was moved another 80 kilometers west of Kalak. We were marching towards the enemy to meet and delay the German hordes coming to Stalingrad. At that time, I could not go in the line yet. I was riding in the car with the division radio station. In a cloud of dust raised by the column, you can't see the road 5 steps ahead. Dust crunches on teeth, blinds eyes, sits on sweaty faces. Wet gymnasts stuck to their backs. Our car is overtaking or lagging behind the column. The engine, overheated from the heat, dies. There is nowhere to get water. All around is flat, dry, wormwood-covered steppe, cut by deep ravines. Okay, we wait until the engine cools down, then we catch up with the column. We passed the village of Oblinskaya, turned around, took the defence and immediately began to dig trenches. We knew. The enemy is approaching somewhere. But where? We threw a cat on the telegraph wires and started calling. "We are the Soviet army. Somebody call out." In reply, there was silence. Only the wires buzzed. When the hope of hearing someone dried up, suddenly a thin voice called out. A telephonist. "Oh, I'm listening." "What your time's in?" "The telephone operator." "Where are you?" "In the village." What's the name of the village?" "No. Chernyshevskaya." "Chernyshevskaya village is 30 kilometers away." "What's going on here?" "Our men are gone. Everyone's gone into hiding. I'm leaving too." "Are you a COMSO member?" "Yes." "You'll help us if you look out the window and tell us everything you see." She lighted up at once with a frightened voice. "Okay." After a few minutes, we asked, "The girl, are you still there?" "Yes." "Don't go. Look out the window." "I'm looking." "What do you see?" "Nothing. Just the sound of engines." "Airplanes?" "I don't know." A little more time passes. We call out, no answer. We call again and again, same result. We decide the girl's gone. Suddenly her voice comes again. "Are you listening?" She's breathing heavily into the receiver. "Yes, we're listening." "Why didn't you answer?" She speaks quickly, frightened. "I ran to see. The Germans are approaching the village. Tanks." "A lot of them?" "Yes, they're coming in." The connection was cut off at half a word. That's how we found out that the Germans were already in Chernyshevskaya. I don't know who that girl was and what happened to her afterwards, but I remember her frightened voice for the rest of my life. She helped us a lot. Today, belonging to the Komsomol is perceived as something unconditionally negative. At the word Komsomol draws some primitive creature whose brains are brainwashed by socialist propaganda, but this is not true at all. They were primitive beings, but they were few. At least less than today's punks. Most of them were normal people who believed that belonging to the Komsomol obliged them to be honest, unselfish, and to serve as an example to others by their behavior. They dressed more modestly than they do now, but they were no less attractive to us. They did not know how to flirt, did not care, as they do now, about their sexuality, but we loved our girls, and the birth rate was high. They didn't make love, they loved, and they knew that love was not entertainment, not pleasure, but happiness. I was a Komsomol member, and I'm not ashamed of it. It was getting dark. We realized that tanks wouldn't come at us from the start. The Germans preferred not to fight at night. In the trench, by the light of a pocket flashlight, we were read the famous Order 227 Dublin. Fascist generals, and after them, and our clever people, explained this order the steadfastness of our soldiers and ultimately our victory. They are convinced that our stubborn resistance is a consequence of the organization of detachments against cowards and panics. In their minds, there is a terrible picture. In front of the Germans, behind machine guns, barrier detachments, the soldier has nowhere to go, and he is frightened to win. They judge us by ourselves. They think you can win by fear. Beaten German generals have forgotten that in their army barrier units were introduced before us, but it did not prevent them from retreating from Stalingrad to Berlin. And we, you see, were frightened of the barrier troops and won with fright, stupidity, and love. Order 227 really played an important role in the history of the Patriotic War. But not the organization of barrier troops was the reason for it. The order said, after the loss of Ukraine, Belarus, Baltic, Donbass, and other regions, we had much less territory, so there were fewer people, bread, metal, factories, factories, factories. We have lost more than 70 million people, more than 800 million poods of bread a year, and more than 10 million tons of metal a year. We no longer have now the predominance over the Germans, neither in human reserves nor in bread reserves. To retreat further means to ruin ourselves and to ruin our motherland. More than half a century has passed since then, and I still remember these words. I remember how they shook all of us. Before that, our propaganda was protecting our tranquility. We had already left the city a week ago, and the radio, in order not to worry the listeners, reported that heavy fighting was going on in the city. We are used to soothing untruths, but this order did not hide the bitter truth from us. It means that things are really very bad, and the time has come to either give in to the enemy or die. Not only I thought so, almost everyone thought so. And the barrier troops. We didn't think about them. We knew that our losses were greater from panic than from fighting. We were interested in the barrier troops. Today, thinking about Order 2227, I realized the power of truth. When we were comfortingly lied to, we retreated and reached the Volga. When we were told the truth, we began to advance and reached Berlin. I hate the philosophy of cowards. It is not cowards who win, but people who have conquered fear in themselves. At dawn, an officer from the 62nd Army headquarters came to us. Division Commander A.F. Afanasyev introduced him as an instructor on fighting tanks. Brothers, the instructor addressed us. The motherland cannot give you enough anti-tank means. The ones you have are not enough. There will be many tanks. A lot of tanks. I have brought you a formidable weapon in the fight against tanks. Ordinary bottles with a flammable mixture. I'll explain to you how to use them. The main thing is not to worry. The instructor began his explanation. A tank is coming at you. He is firing at you from the gun. But the main thing is not to worry and wait. We are not new at the front. We knew what it means not to worry when a tank is coming at you and fires at you from a cannon. Not that your soul, the earth shudders from the explosions of shells. There's a dreary coldness in your heart. If you have not yet been hit by shrapnel, you are sprinkled with clods of earth, and next to your already bleeding and moaning wounded day, do not worry. All right, let's keep listening. The tank is getting closer. Now he can no longer fire from the gun. The instructor continues enthusiastically. Dead space. The barrel doesn't tilt further, it fires from the machine gun. Many can't stand it, jump out of the trench. You shouldn't do that. You'll be mowed down by the first burst. Is that clear? Understandable. How not to understand? The tank is very close. The instructor continues. Yet, it can crush you with its tracks. Many people throw a bottle at its forehead out of fear. It's dangerous. The fuel will burn, but he doesn't give a damn. You only find yourself, he'll start to iron the trench, and you know what that means. We know very well what trenching means. The tank turns on the trench, the earth collapses and buries people alive, and the tank tampers the earth, irons it. A terrible death. It is necessary not to worry. Continues the instructor with the arrangement. And to pass the tank over itself and to throw a bottle into the radiator, it has a radiator at the back. That's the end of it. It'll burn like a candle. It's very simple. Someone next to me is sighing. It's very simple. And the instructor continues, as if it's no longer important. True. You should keep in mind that the tank is followed by machine gunners in the number of 7 to 21 people. There was a friendly laughter. It's simple. It's as simple as you can think of. What are the machine gunners for? Just like that. Just to watch. Of course. And we suffered heavy losses. In these battles we lost to the Germans in many ways. We had dozens of tanks. The Germans had thousands. And yet our tanks suddenly burst into battle and terrified the Germans. Time has erased many names from my memory, but I can't forget the main thing, that among us there were guys of different nationalities, that we all considered ourselves soldiers of one great motherland and fought and gave our lives for it. Today our former allies are trying in every possible way to belittle our army and the heroism of our fighters. If you watch other programs on television, read newspapers, they unobtrusively but persistently belittle our victory. They create the impression that we fought in the wrong way and defended in the wrong way, and in fact it was not us who defeated fascism, but our allies. And every time it hurts me to read it. They sigh, we fought for Stalin and this should be a shame for us. Nonsense. We had more important reasons to die. The Germans made no secret of the fact that they wanted to take our land from us and turn us into their slaves. It was not just words. not propaganda. This desire permeated their behavior on our land. We did not want our people, our parents, our favorite girls, and even ourselves to become someone's slaves. Is it not enough to go to death and win? We were hastily entrenching ourselves. There was little time left before contact with the enemy. To create a reliable line of defense in a few hours is impossible. Our command decided not to wait for the enemy to attack us, but to attack him ourselves. This allowed us to gain time. An advanced detachment was formed, which moved towards the enemy and struck at the village Chernyshevskaya. The battle began at night, unexpectedly for the Germans. At first they thought that they were attacked by partisans, but soon realized that regular troops were fighting against them. Such audacity they did not expect. At that time they were confident in their strength and expected a quick victory over us. They marched to the Caucasus and Stalingrad without meeting any resistance. They were the masters of the situation, and here it was not them who were attacking, but they were being attacked.